This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Okay. Hi, guys. So, if you're watching this, first of all, I'm outside. Never recorded outside before. This could be great or it could be absolutely awful, depending on how the dogs behave. Also, I look like I don't know, got a horrible sunburn. My face is super red because I just did a workout video. So I'm not looking my best, but this podcast is not about how I look. It is about true crime. And you also may notice if you're watching this giant disc thing kind of in front of my face, and that is it's supposed to help eliminate mouth sounds. I saw a few reviews on Apple where people were talking about that they like the podcast, but they simply cannot get past all the mouth sounds. And I don't know exactly what that is. I don't know if it's like me breathing. I have asthma, so sometimes when I breathe, it sounds a little wheezy and annoying. Or maybe it's the way that I talk and pronounce like my T's and my S's. And I don't really know, but I can't really change the way that I talk. So maybe this podcast is just not for those people, although I appreciate the feedback, because if I don't, if nobody says that, then I don't know that it's something that needs to be fixed. So I also swallow a lot while I'm doing this because it's a lot of talking. So I'm going to try to like lean back when I do that, and maybe it won't be picked up. Either way, this is supposed to help not pick up as many sounds that my mouth makes. Of course, I'm also choosing to do this outside tonight, so it may pick up car noises, and there's a very good chance that the dogs are going to bark, but I'm going to do my best to stop recording if that happens and not make a whole thing about it. Not like say, guys, I'm going to stop recording. And because I do agree with some of the comments that I think that I put a lot of things on Patreon. I record a lot of extra stuff for Patreon, just not true crime, just talking to the people on Patreon because I've gotten to know them. And I think that some of that kind of casualness, I've allowed it to seep into the Tuesday episodes. And the goal always has been to keep the Tuesday episodes more serious and more focused on true crime. And then, the Wednesday bonus episodes can be whatever I want them to be. So on the Wednesday episodes, maybe I'm just going to make a ton of mouth sounds, but I'm going to try and keep them out of the Tuesday episodes and try and keep these a little bit more professional. With that being said, we're not going to do an intro. We're just going to jump right in. I do have a bit of a sense of place. Our story today takes place in Southern California, which debatable if that's considered the Southwest or not, but for our purposes, it is. For today, it is. And it takes place in a city, I guess, called Coronado. So Coronado is a coastal resort city located in San Diego. It sits on a narrow peninsula connected to mainland San Diego by the Silver Strand and the San Diego Coronado Bridge. There's about 20,000 people that live there. Coronado covers 32.5 square miles, but most of that is actually water. The land area is only about 8 square miles. There's an average of 261 sunny days per year. And for those of you who have forgotten, there is 350 sunny days in Tucson. It's far too many sunny days. Coronado was founded in 1885 as a resort town, and it quickly became a playground for the rich and famous. It's home to the iconic Hotel del Coronado, which opened in 1888. It's a stunning Victorian beach resort, rumored to be haunted by the ghost of Kate Morgan, a woman who died mysteriously in 1892. So I mentioned that Coronado is connected to San Diego by the San Diego Coronado Bridge, which is a 2-mile long curved bridge built in 1969, famous for its stunning views. And unfortunately, also it's famous for having a lot of suicides. So a lot of people jump off that bridge. Coronado Beach is consistently ranked as one of the best beaches in the United States. And the sand there, they call it golden sparkling sand, and it actually contains mica. It's a major military town, home to Naval Air Station North Island, where the elite Navy SEALs train, including SEAL Team 6. It's also a Hollywood hotspot. Marilyn Monroe filmed Some Like It Hot at Hotel del Coronado in 1958, and it's been a backdrop for many movies. It has some of the most expensive real estate in the United States, especially lots of multi-million dollar homes, including the Spreckels Mansion, which plays a big role in our story today. So the Spreckels Mansion, so the Spreckels Mansion was built in 1908 by sugar magnate John D. Spreckels. It's one of the first steel reinforced concrete mansions in all of California. It was designed to withstand earthquakes after the 1906 San Francisco quake. Originally, it was a wedding gift to his son, Klaus Spreckels, and his wife, Ellis. And Ellis lived there until 1967, was known for hosting very lavish parties. The house expanded over time to include a guest house, a four-car garage with servant quarters, and a private pool and spa. It has been the center of conspiracy theories ever since our story today. So our story today kind of changed the future of this mansion and how it's known. It still does exist. It's a high-profile landmark in Coronado. And that is the Spreckels Mansion. So let's move on to our story. So, our story today. Our story today focuses on Rebecca Zahau, who was born March 15th, 1979. She is a Burmese American woman. She was born in, sorry, I'm going to mispronounce all of this. She was born in Phalam, Chin State, a town in the Chin Hills of northwestern Burma, now Myanmar. She was of Chin ethnicity and raised Protestant. She lived in Nepal and Germany before immigrating to the United States around 2001. As of 2011, which is when our story takes place, most of her family lived in St. Joseph, Missouri. She has an older sister and two younger sisters. One of them is still a teenager. In 2002, she married Neil Nalepa, a 36-year-old nursing student from Scottsdale, Arizona. Their marriage ended in divorce in February 2011. Before that divorce, though, it was August 2009. She was arrested for shoplifting after stealing $1,000 worth of jewelry from a Macy's in Phoenix, Arizona. She did plead guilty to that charge. She worked as an ophthalmic technician, but left her job around December 2010. Now, remember, her marriage ended in divorce in 2011, so just keep that in mind. In 2008, she began dating someone named Jonah Shacknai. He is the CEO of Medicis Pharmaceutical. She was still legally married to Neil Nalepa, but they were clearly split up. By 2010, her boyfriend, Jonah, was one of the highest paid CEOs in Arizona, earning $6.4 million that year, and that was in 2010. Jonah had been married twice before. His first marriage was to Kimberly James, which ended in divorce after a 3-year custody battle over their 2 children. His second marriage was to Dina Romano, and they also had a son, Max, who was born in 2005. That also ended in divorce. And that brings us to 2008 when he began dating Rebecca Zahau. So Rebecca does, I believe, eventually get divorced from Neil, but this story is so incredibly crazy that in complete honesty, I didn't spend a lot of time on her kind of back life because I wanted to be able to focus enough time on the actual murder and investigation. So, the most important thing that we need to know is that she is married to Jonah and they are staying at Jonah's, apparently, the Spreckels Mansion was Jonah's summer house, and Rebecca is staying there with him. So our story begins on July 11th, 2011. And on July 11th, Rebecca, Max, and Rebecca's teenage sister, Zena, who was 13 at the time, they were at the Ocean Boulevard Beach House Mansion in Coronado. That's the Spreckels Mansion, but it sometimes is referred to not as the Spreckels Mansion in this. I probably will continue to refer to it as the Spreckels Mansion because I like the way that sounds. But Jonah used this mansion as his summer estate. He wasn't home at this moment. He was in town, but he wasn't at the house when this moment is taking place on July 11th. So at some point during the day on July 11th, Jonah's son, Max, who was only 6 years old at the time, fell face first over a second floor banister. Rebecca was in the bathroom at the time, and when she came out of the bathroom, moments later, she found Max laying unconscious on the floor with a scooter nearby and a broken chandelier. She had her younger sister, Zena, promptly call 911. Max was unresponsive and not breathing when first responders arrived, and they quickly took him to Rady Children's Hospital in San Diego. Jonah was at the gym, actually, when this happened. He was notified, and he, of course, rushed to the hospital. Max sustained severe injuries to his spinal cord and facial bones. The spinal cord injury appeared to be affecting his heart rate and his breathing, and the facial bone fractures had apparently pretty severely disfigured his face. So the next day, July 12th, Max was in the hospital for a very long time at this point, is what they're expecting. And Jonah's in the hospital with him. The next day, July 12th, Rebecca drops her younger sister, Zena, off at the airport. Zena's heading back to Missouri, where the rest of Rebecca's family and Zena's family is. After Rebecca dropped Zena off at the airport, she then picked up Jonah's brother, Adam, who had just arrived on a flight from Memphis, Tennessee. And that night, Rebecca, Jonah, and Adam had dinner with a friend named Howard. Max is still in the hospital, of course. After dinner, Rebecca and Adam, Jonah's brother, headed back to Spreckels Mansion. And while Rebecca was back at the house, she was apparently hanging out in her bedroom. She had some texts and phone calls with family members, and Adam went out to where he was staying in the guest house. Jonah ended up going back to the hospital to stay with Max and Max's mother, Dina Romano, Jonah's ex-wife. And I thought this was kind of strange, but I found several places where it said that Jonah then eventually left the hospital to recuperate at a nearby Ronald McDonald house. I'm not sure I understand that. Clearly, Jonah is very, very wealthy. I understand if the hospital maybe is too far away for him to want to go all the way back home. I'd assume there's a hotel nearby rather than a Ronald. I'm not sure I know what a Ronald McDonald house is. I thought it was kind of like kind of like somewhere that Girl Scouts went and stuff like that. I'm not sure. I guess I should have looked up what Ronald McDonald House is, but we're not going to spend time pondering over it. We're just going to move on. So Max is in the hospital. Jonah, his father, is at a nearby Ronald McDonald House. Rebecca, Jonah's girlfriend, and Adam, Jonah's brother, are back at the house, the Spreckels Mansion. Nothing else of note really happened this night, although there were reports later that night that indicated that loud music was coming from the beach house, which is, I can't confirm or deny that, to be honest. There were several accounts that said that, but no one can ever confirm or deny that, I guess. Just something to keep in mind. So now we are on July 13th, the next day. At 6:45 a.m., Adam discovered Rebecca's nude body hanging from a balcony. She was naked, as I just said. Her hands were bound behind her back and her feet were tied. A gag was stuffed into her mouth, and she was hanging from a second floor balcony by a red rope that was tied to a bed frame and then tied around her neck. He called 911 at 6:48 and sent a text message to his brother to inform him of what had happened and what was going on. Before the police arrived, Adam did cut down Rebecca's body and attempted CPR. When medics arrived, they attempted to revive her, but unfortunately, Rebecca was pronounced dead at the scene. The police initiated right away forensic and toxicology testing on her body as part of the autopsy to help determine the cause of death. Early on in this investigation, speculation of foul play came about pretty quickly. But as we will learn, there were a lot of reasons that investigators didn't actually think that foul play was involved. And then there were some reasons that people did think foul play was involved. So we'll get into that in a little bit. First, unfortunately, there is more sad news for Jonah. But actually, okay, no. So, despite the efforts of medics who attempted to revive her, Rebecca was pronounced dead at the scene. Also on July 13th, while investigators were going over the scene of Rebecca's death at Spreckels Mansion, Adam spoke with detectives at the Coronado Police Department. The interview was taped. Adam gave permission for them to tape it. And when speaking to police and investigators, Adam recounted his version of the events of the previous evening and then that morning when he found Rebecca. He also agreed to take a polygraph test after he was done talking to police and like sharing his account. The polygraph examiner determined that the polygraph results were actually inconclusive in regards to questions about Adam's involvement in Rebecca's death. But Adam, of course, is strongly adamant that he had nothing to do with this. And this is what he explains to investigators when he's talking to them. So he says he woke up around 6:30 a.m. and left the guest house. He was walking over to the main house. He wanted to make some coffee. But when he got there, he saw something shocking, and that was Rebecca naked, hanging from the second-story balcony. He said Rebecca was gagged with a long-sleeved T-shirt, which had also been wrapped around the noose and then around her neck with the sleeves double knotted and stuffed into her mouth. Her hands were bound behind her back. Her feet were tied together. A rope, it was described in a lot of accounts as reddish orange, but in the official report that I was able to find, it was red. And I saw pictures and it looks red to me. So a red rope was wrapped around her neck. The other end was tied to the bed frame in the bedroom where she had been staying. Adam says that he ran into the kitchen to get a kitchen knife. He also grabbed a three-legged table and dragged it into the courtyard because she's outside. I don't know if that's clear or not, but there was a balcony off the second floor that overlooked the courtyard of the home, and she was hanging from that balcony. So he climbed onto the table, cut Rebecca down, lowered her body to the ground. He removed the gag and started performing CPR. At 6:48, he called 911. He was obviously very shaken up, frantic, and you can hear him on the 911 recording shouting, "I got a girl, she hung herself, same place you got the kid yesterday." And he also is repeatedly yelling, one would assume, at her, "Are you alive? Are you alive?" as he's trying to revive her. When police arrived, they saw Rebecca's body lying in the courtyard. the knife was on the nearby table that he had dragged out there. What's weird is that the San Diego medical examiner, Dr. Jonathan Lucas, didn't arrive until 7:14 p.m. That's about 12 hours later. So right away, people who are kind of critical about this and, you know, speculating that maybe this isn't a suicide, which, of course, when I read this, the first thing I thought is, well, of course it's not a suicide. Her feet were bound and her hands were tied behind her, like behind her back. And the t-shirt wrapped around her neck and stuffed in her mouth. How did she do that and tie her hands behind her back? Like it just, to me, it didn't seem like obviously there's foul play here. However, I gave Mark kind of like an overview of this story, and I mentioned that, and he said, well, sometimes people, when they hang themselves, they do tie their hands and feet so that they can't like have second thoughts and panic and try to get themselves down, which is just such a tragic, terrible thought. But this delay, the fact that the medical examiner didn't get there until 12 hours later, and her body was outside, fully exposed for hours. I'd assume that it was eventually covered up, but this was just seemed like a major failure, and as we will soon learn, one of many major failures in this investigation. From the very start, which we are going to jump into here in a moment, this case was just filled with really bizarre details, definitely plenty of questionable decisions by authorities, and things that just didn't add up. And like I said, this is just the beginning. So, sadly, on July 16th, Max passed away due to brain damage caused by oxygen deprivation resulting from his injuries. So now Jonah has not only lost his girlfriend, but he has also lost his son. And two deaths at the famed Spreckels Mansion in 1 week clearly drew quite a bit of attention from the public and the media. On day one, literally the day that they found Rebecca, news helicopters were flying over the mansion, getting footage, capturing Rebecca's, I mean, this is so sad, but capturing images of her nude body, totally exposed, lying in the courtyard. And those images were broadcast everywhere. And it very quickly turned from a tragedy into just kind of like a full-blown media spectacle. I mean, also, this isn't too surprising. I mean, we have a millionaire pharmaceutical executive. Honestly, I think he was veering on billionaire at this point. His son has a tragic accident, and then his girlfriend has a bizarre, possibly unexplained death. It was a story that felt too strange and too real to ignore. So I mean, I have written down here within days, I'd say within hours, the public was hooked on this story. And these deaths at the Spreckels Mansion didn't just make national headlines, they made international news. Every major outlet was covering it, which fueled even more speculation and left more unanswered questions. There was so much media coverage on this that just 1 week after Rebecca's death, Jonah hired a public relations firm, Citric and Company, to handle media inquiries. Reporters were asking questions, and one of the PR specialists explained that Jonah had simply hired them to manage the overwhelming amount of calls that he was getting and to give him space to grieve. But Citric and Company didn't just handle the calls. They also went after journalists that they felt were reporting inaccurate details about the case. It was very clear that Jonah and his team wanted to carefully control this narrative. They wanted to make sure that their version of events was what the public heard and not all the kind of speculation. And it makes sense because on July 14th, Medicis, his medical pharmaceutical company that I'm not pronouncing correctly, had its sharpest one-day decline in stock price in many, many months due to all of this press coverage. So, of course, they want to control the narrative. And, right away, the internet is exploding with theories. People were dissecting everything that was published and public knowledge, debating whether this was a tragic suicide or there was some foul play. Maybe it was a cover up for murder. And at the time, it wasn't just true crime fanatics getting involved. There were forensic experts, lawyers, investigators who were all also weighing in either on, message boards and also in the media. There were forensics experts and lawyers who were weighing in to different media outlets on what they thought. So the sheer amount of media attention on this case meant that there was no shortage of evidence, opinions, and theories. But the problem was that depending on who you asked, the same set of facts that everyone was getting, depending on how you looked at them, they could tell completely different stories. We're going to get more into that later. On July 26th, investigators concluded that Max's death was, in fact, an accident. They suggested that he may have tripped over something and he just accidentally fell over the balcony. But like with everything in this case, nothing was quite that simple. A trauma doctor who examined Max before his death and conducted an autopsy, he expressed some skepticism about the injuries that Max sustained from the fall. This doctor believed that the injuries were inconsistent with the cardiac arrest and brain swelling that Max had. And this doctor thought that Max may have suffocated before the fall. However, the investigation into whether or not Max's death was an accident was pretty quickly overshadowed by the investigation into Rebecca's death. So I want to start with just some real basics. I want to try and set the scene for you of what investigators walked in on, because online I was able to access the official report from the San Diego Sheriff's Office and the medical examiner. And there's pictures, which I will either post or include in this video. So the inside scene, they found red rope secured to the footboard of the bed, 2 paintbrushes, one with black paint on the floor near the bed, a tube of black paint under a plastic bag on the floor near the bed, 2 kitchen knives, one large and one small, on the floor near the bed. One side of the bed was pulled slightly away from the wall. Red rope went out the double doors, like from it was tied to the bed. It went out the double doors leading to the balcony and then over the railing. They found foot and toe impressions on the balcony tile, and that dust on the balcony railing had been disturbed. There was also a boot impression on the balcony tile. They eventually identified this as a police officer's boot. They did find the police officer matched his boot, which seems like shoddy police work, or a mistake. Mistakes happen. There were really no other disturbances found, except for a cryptic message was written in black paint on a door inside the mansion, and it said, "She saved him. Can you save her?" I'm not going to go into that any more than that right now. I'm just going to let that marinate in your brain. So outside, the investigators found Rebecca lying on the ground in the courtyard. Her wrists and ankles were both bound with red rope. Her hands were bound behind her back. The same red rope and a long-sleeve t-shirt were around her neck. The same red rope was hanging over the balcony railing. There was a table below the balcony and a kitchen knife on the ground near Rebecca that Adam had used to cut her down. So the evidence that they decided to examine and look for DNA was the black paint from the door, the paintbrush, the paint tube, the victim's hand and torso, and the rope around the victim's neck. And DNA from all of those items all matched Rebecca. No. Yes, all matched. Fingerprints from the guest room entry door jamb which apparently is where Rebecca was staying, which is also peculiar to me because she's dating Jonah and he's not going to stay in the guest house at his own in the guest room at his own mansion. But I never saw anything else about that. Nobody seemed to question that. Fingerprints from the guest room entry door jamb, balcony door, the large knife found upstairs, and the bed leg next to the rope all matched Rebecca's fingerprints. And DNA profiles from the bindings on Rebecca's hands and feet, the rope around her neck, the rope attached to the footboard of the bed, and the small knife were only from Rebecca. So they didn't find any other DNA on any of those things, which, look, if it's a suicide, I suppose that makes sense that it's just her DNA on the rope, and the knife. Yeah. But why? So all that DNA, from the black paint, from the door, the brush, the paint tube, the victim's hand and torso, and the rope around the victim's neck. Actually, I have that it all matched, but I don't have that it all matched Rebecca. I just have that it all matched one person. But the fingerprints that they found and the DNA on the bindings and the rope and the small knife upstairs, that DNA, it was only Rebecca's DNA. There was no one else's DNA, which, if no one else was involved, I guess that makes sense. But like, didn't someone else buy the rope? Wouldn't someone else have handled this rope? Rebecca, this rope was found at the house. It wasn't like she went out and bought it. Just something to think about. So, directly from the autopsy report that I found online, they gave the autopsy report. They actually put it into a PowerPoint and put this on the San Diego Sheriff's Office website. And so it's just bullet points that list what the autopsy report found. And so it says that it found that the victim was found hanging, fully suspended with ankles bound and hands bound behind back, long sleeve t-shirt wrapped loosely around neck. Based on the autopsy findings, she was alive when she went over the balcony. Neck injuries were consistent with a drop from that height as opposed to usual hanging. So a drop from the height of the balcony. Her neck injuries matched a drop that high. There is no evidence of a struggle or sexual assault and no other significant injuries. Her feet were dirty, consistent with standing on the dirty balcony. No toxicology or physical evidence was found that she was rendered unconscious or incapacitated prior to the hanging. They found that her hand was easily removed from the wrist bindings, which, with that, they're insinuating that she was able to slip her hand in and out easily. So she could have put her hands behind her back and just slipped one wrist in and out. They're basically trying to make a case for that. She could have bound herself and still hung herself. So according to the autopsy report, the medical examiner said the cause of death was hanging and the manner of death was suicide. Her time of death was estimated to be 3 a.m. on July 13th, and based on the autopsy, the medical examiner, Dr. Lucas, believed that she was alive when she went over the balcony. The autopsy also revealed that she had 4 separate head injuries, which raised some questions. So Dr. Lucas suggested that she might have hit her head on the balcony as she went over, since she didn't fall in a perfectly vertical position. But other people disagreed with this. And this is where, remember I said, forensic experts and other investigators from like other parts of the country, people were weighing in on all of these details to different media outlets and just online. So Dr. Werner Spitz, who is a forensic expert who worked on the Casey Anthony case, he weighed in and said that's possible. That's possible, what Dr. Lucas said, that she might have hit her head on the balcony when she went over. He explained that when someone drops, their body doesn't necessarily just free fall like super cleanly and straight down, that they bump into things, which obviously, I mean, I feel like does that need to be explained? Not that I've seen someone hang themselves outside of like in the background of The Wizard of Oz, if anybody knows that story. Um, but it has, correct me if I'm wrong, I'd imagine it's somewhat similar to a bungee jump. I know bungee jumping, it's tied around your feet, not your neck. So of course your body's going to act differently, but just just common sense tells us that if you put a rope around your neck and jump over the balcony, your body's not just going to go boop straight down. Like, no kidding. I feel like we know that. But Dr. Maurice Godwin, a forensic consultant that was actually hired by Rebecca's family later on, um, he looked at photographs of the scene and he provided kind of an alternate interpretation of the evidence. He actually called the head injuries. He said it's highly unlikely that this happened from her hanging herself. The odds of hitting your head 4 different times while falling are pretty slim, which makes sense to me. I could understand hitting your head once and maybe, sorry, this is graphic, but maybe your body swings and you hit your head again. But at that point, that would be it. She's not jumping off of the San Francisco Bridge, like the Golden Gate Bridge. She's, it's a nine, the balcony's up, I believe, 9 feet. Dr. Godwin also had a problem with the way that the footprint evidence on the balcony was interpreted. Based on photographs at the scene, he said that in addition to the bare footprints from Rebecca and the police officers, but boot print, there was another shoe print present on the balcony, which was actually created on top of Rebecca's footprint. And according to Dr. Godwin, this indicates that someone else had been on the balcony with Rebecca at the time of her death. Adam said nothing about going up to the balcony to cut her down. He brought a table and cut her down from the courtyard. So presumably no one else has been on that balcony except for her. But so why is there another footprint on top of her footprint? So clearly it seems like we're already seeing a few discrepancies with this investigation pretty early on, which is why Rebecca's family was pretty shocked when on September 2nd, the San Diego Sheriff's Office officially closed the case and ruled Rebecca's death a suicide. Investigators explained that they believed that Rebecca had been overcome with guilt from Max's accident. She bound her hands and feet herself using an elaborate technique, and then she hung herself. Her boyfriend, Jonah, Max's father, publicly supported these findings. He stated that he believed that Rebecca had indeed taken her own life. But the media didn't, right off the bat, the media was questioning this. In early September, soon after they officially closed the case and ruled it a suicide, several writers for Forbes, including true crime author Kathy Scott and a lawyer, Victoria Pynchon, expressed some reservations about the findings. One of them even described the ruling as an embarrassing public blunder. Several other magazines published columns and editorials by authors, including a column by trial lawyer Roy Black. He criticized these half-baked theories surrounding her death. He highlighted the absence of DNA evidence, saying, quote, "How could anyone do all of this without leaving behind a scintilla of microscopic evidence? They would have had to have been wearing a full rubber suit or some type of spacesuit and levitated over the scene." So he's saying that he thinks it is a suicide. So there was debate in the media over this. There was no debate with Rebecca's family, though. They were 100% certain that this ruling was incorrect, and they were completely convinced that she died as a result of foul play, and they were determined to prove this. They accused the San Diego Sheriff's Office of rushing Rebecca's investigation and concluding the investigation prematurely. Apparently, the San Diego Sheriff's Office responded to this accusation on their FAQ page, frequently asked questions page on their website, which seems very strange to me. They said, quote, "We had between 7 and 15 investigators, in addition to crime lab personnel, looking into this case for 7 weeks exclusively. There was no rush to judgment. There was simply a large number of resources dedicated to this investigation full time. For the first 7 to 10 days of this investigation, it was widely believed among investigators this case was more likely to be a homicide. As the evidence began to come in, however, that belief began to change. Ultimately, the evidence convinced everyone involved this case was a suicide. No rush to judgment, no tunnel vision. But regardless of what the sheriff's office put out on their FAQ page, from the very beginning, really, Rebecca's family and those who were close to her, aside from her boyfriend, did not believe that she took her own life. Her younger sister said, Becky did not commit suicide. My sister was murdered. A former trainer who worked for a while with Rebecca backed this up, saying that she was always happy, always smiling. He never saw any signs that she was struggling or depressed. Rebecca's older sister, Mary, made the following statements regarding her sister's mysterious death, saying, quote, obviously the investigation is not complete yet, but as far as I know about my sister did not commit suicide. My sister was not depressed. My sister was not frantic. My sister was planning on calling my parents the next day. So she may have made this statement before they officially closed the investigation or before she knew that they officially closed the investigation, I guess. Rebecca's mother also spoke out to many people and journalists saying, we know for sure she wouldn't ever kill herself. Her family pushed back hard because police started saying, she was depressed. She did kill herself. And they said, no, she wasn't depressed. She was a joyful, positive person. And she was a Christian and she believed that suicide was wrong. Even her ex-husband was quoted as saying that he could not believe that Rebecca would kill herself. It was completely out of character for her. But despite all of these doubts that family and friends were voicing, Sheriff Bill Gore, who led the investigation, kind of just dismissed them. He said that they presented all of the evidence to Rebecca's family in Missouri and that it was unfortunate that they can't accept the results. But Rebecca's family wasn't going to let go that easily. On September 7th, 2011, the Zahau family launched justiceforrebecca.org, a website aimed at raising funds for their own private investigation. On the site, they accused the sheriff's department of working too hard to make this look like a suicide and refusing to let the family challenge that narrative. By late September, they were working really hard and demanding that the case be reopened and that a fresh look was taken at the evidence. Jonah decided to step in around this time, and on September 20th, he wrote a letter to California Attorney General Kamala Harris, requesting a state review of the investigation, not because he doubted the findings, but because he hoped it would bring confidence, comfort, and resolution to those still questioning the case. The request was denied almost immediately, and the very next day, Chief Assistant Attorney General Dane Gillette responded saying the office would not be reviewing the case. Rebecca's family was still refusing to back down, and they took their demands to national television, which is always such a good idea. I feel like that's, you got to get the media involved. On September 30th, they appeared on NBC's Today Show, and they called for an independent investigation by the state attorney general's office. But despite their valiant efforts, officials still refused to reopen the case, and Rebecca's family was left with a lot of unanswered questions and a fight that they were not giving up on yet. So, very determined to challenge this official ruling, Rebecca's family hired Seattle attorney Anne Bremner, and Anne did not hold back. She publicly called out the medical examiner's conclusion, saying this would be the first case in the history of the world that a woman killed herself like this. It's ridiculous on the face of it. And I mean, I don't know if the first case in the history of the world, but she kind of has a point. I mean, the fact that that they're alleging that Rebecca tied herself up, bound herself so intensely like that, and jumped, it just doesn't fit the usual pattern of suicide, especially for women. Anne Bremner also noted that I took this from Reddit. And so I'm reading it exactly as I found it on Reddit. Anne Bremner noted that she found it odd that Rebecca's long hair was tucked under the noose and the t-shirt found wrapped around her neck. Many people, particularly women, found it unusual for a woman to place something around her neck, whether a shirt collar or a noose, and not pull their long hair out over it. This detail, according to Anne Bremner, indicates that someone other than Rebecca may have placed the noose around her neck. I don't know how I feel about that. I have had long hair for a very long time, and I do understand, putting a scarf or a jacket or a hoodie on, and you pull your hair out of it. You don't want your hair to be tucked in. I get that. If I am at the point where I'm killing myself, where I'm going to hang myself, I'm not sure that's a priority for me to make sure that my hair is not stuck under the noose. Maybe, but I don't think so. Uh, Also, many people, her family, friends, did not believe that Rebecca would ever intentionally display her naked body the way it was discovered in death. Rebecca's mother is quoted as saying she would never do a thing like that, meaning the hanging, and she would never do it without clothes on. She cited their Asian heritage and Christian faith as reasons for Rebecca's modesty. And I mean, I'm not a Christian, I'm not Asian, and if I was going to do that, I certainly wouldn't do it naked. I'm not sure I understand the point of that, of why do it naked? It does seem very odd. Um, all of these statements by the Zahau's attorney, Bremner, they did not sit well with Jonah. Jonah did not like it. So Jonah also had an attorney. His attorney, Dan K. Webb, accused Bremner of implying that Jonah used his wealth and influence to sway the investigation. This escalated really quickly. Jonah's lawyer fired off a cease and desist letter warning Bremner that some of her comments were defamatory and, in his words, highly insensitive on a human level. He also claimed that she was fueling the media frenzy. Legal experts who weighed in on this case didn't think that Jonah was going to follow through with a lawsuit, though. Uh, a lot of people point out that if Jonah decided to sue Rebecca's family, it would bring more attention to the case, which Jonah probably didn't want. So this legal threat seemed more about kind of shutting down the conversation and speculation rather than actually challenging Rebecca's family in court. Either way, it's all so messy at this point. First of all, you have a child who died, and then 2, 3 days later, I guess Max died after Rebecca, but you had two people who died in 1 week at this mansion, and both there was questions swirling around both deaths. You've also got legal threats, PR spinning this a bunch of different ways, and a grieving family who's not backing down. So no matter which side you're on, there's only really one thing at this point that's clear, and that's that this case is not as open and shut as authorities kind of made it seem. Which is why it makes sense that Rebecca's family and their attorney requested a second autopsy be conducted by someone different than the San Diego medical examiner. Now, obviously, Rebecca's family thought something fishy was going on, but they may have also just thought that the first medical examiner was just flat out wrong. That's up for debate and doesn't really matter because either way, they were not buying the official story of suicide. So, 4 months after Rebecca's death, her body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed by Dr. Wecht. He couldn't perform a complete second autopsy because she had been embalmed. So there were certain things that he was apparently unable to do. But he did everything he could. And he did. Sorry, guys, that was turning the microphone. He did take issue with several findings from the first autopsy. He believed that the fractures in her throat weren't from hanging, that they were from manual strangulation. Now, let me be clear. Rebecca's neck injuries were consistent with hanging, but they were not exclusive to hanging. They also were consistent with strangulation. So either one is fitting. But the first medical examiner said nothing about manual strangulation and that was even a possibility. He only said that these injuries were consistent with hanging, again, which they were, but also consistent with manual strangulation. That's an important fact, I think. Now, both the first medical examiner, Dr. Lucas, and this new examiner, Dr. Wecht, noted in their autopsy reports that Rebecca had 4 areas of hemorrhage near the top of her scalp. Remember, 4 different scalp injuries. So Dr. Lucas, the first medical examiner, believed that these happened because she hit her head when she went over, maybe on the balcony, maybe also on the vegetation that was growing under the balcony itself. Dr. Lucas, that the first medical examiner, theorized that Rebecca didn't fall straight down over the balcony like we already talked about, but maybe she fell at an angle, and so her head came in contact with four different things. Dr. Wecht, either one, wasn't convinced of this. The four abrasions apparently didn't break the skin, but he thinks that they could have been caused by intentionally inflicted blows to the head, either with a fist or another item. Not something, obviously not something super, super heavy because that would have broken skin. Dr. Wecht hypothesized that although these blows would not have caused her death, they could have knocked her unconscious. And if someone else was to blame for this, this could explain how someone had managed to cause her body to go over the balcony in kind of a weird way with no signs of a struggle. If she was unconscious, somebody could have just thrown her over the balcony. Dr. Wecht actually at one point said this was a homicide. He also found it really weird that there were relatively few abrasions or injuries to Rebecca's arms, while there were multiple abrasions to her back because her arms were tied behind her back. And so shouldn't there be similar, if her back is all scraped up, why not her arms? Just odd. So the discrepancies found between these two autopsies, these weren't the only issues that Rebecca's family kind of discovered about this investigation. So, as we know, the Zahaus were convinced that the San Diego Sheriff's Office mishandled this case. They, aside from the autopsies, they claimed that there were key pieces of evidence at the scene that were never properly investigated. A clump of hair and a drop of blood were reportedly found in the master bathroom. Neither were tested for DNA. The San Diego Sheriff's Office brushed it off, saying Rebecca had likely showered before her death, and possibly she was spotting or menstruating at the time. Since there was no other visible blood in the area, they didn't see a need to test it. I mean, that just seems crazy. First of all, from an autopsy, couldn't you determine if she was menstruating at the time? And second of all, why? What? Just test it. It just seems odd. It seems like a huge oversight. Also, in the guest house where Adam was staying, investigators noted a bottle of clear liquid in his room. Never tested it for DNA, never tested it at all, didn't know what it was. And even more suspicious than that, they found women's underwear. It was white, pink, and purple in the guest house trash. Rebecca's family thought this should have been tested for DNA and possible signs of assault, but the San Diego Sheriff's Office refused. They said that Rebecca's body showed no signs of sexual assault, and the underwear probably belonged to a guest from a slumber party that had happened at the mansion several days earlier. They defended their decisions. They said they had to focus on the immediate crime scene rather than searching the entire mansion and guest houses. I mean, really? I, I just, and this wasn't that long ago. This was 2011. It's not like this was 1980 and they didn't have the technology or the manpower. I don't know. It just seems really strange that they only focused on the immediate crime scene and not the entire rest of the house. I can't think of a case that we've covered where they didn't, pick apart the whole entire home. And I get that this is a mansion and it's quite large, but come on. So I mean, critical evidence is being overlooked, dismissed, or honestly just outright ignored. And whether that was carelessness or something more intentional, I don't know. Either way, it's undeniable that this case has some pretty glaring red flags. And if you can believe it, we haven't even covered all of them yet. So one of the most controversial red flags that we have talked about was the fact that her hands and feet were bound, and then everything that kind of went along with that. So for reference, they said that Rebecca's hands and feet were bound using a slip knot and a cleat hitch knot. These are knots that are apparently commonly used in boating, but they're not exclusive to boating. They're just commonly used there. The red rope was water sports rope, and it was used, it was also tied to the bed. So the rope was tied to the bed and then led over the balcony railing. And I did mention earlier that one side of the bed was pulled slightly away from the wall. But a lot of people argued that if Rebecca had gone over the balcony on her own, like someone hadn't, I don't want to say gently, but someone hadn't just like placed her over the balcony, but she had jumped, that the bed would have moved more significantly. And I tend to agree with that because if you think about it, the full weight of somebody jumping off of a balcony, that bed is going to, jerk away from the wall. Whereas if somebody, takes her body and just kind of doesn't like toss her, I'm sorry, that's graphic again, but just kind of places her over the balcony, yeah, okay, then the bed probably isn't going to jerk that much away from the wall. Does that make sense? I hope I'm explaining that okay. Um, and then, of course, the sheer fact that her hands and feet were tied and her hands were behind her back seemed, again, to me, like an obvious sign of foul play. But the sheriff's department said exactly what Mark had said to me, that there are cases where people tie themselves up to prevent changing their minds about committing suicide, which for some reason, something about that really breaks my heart. I'm, I won't get it. I will not go off on a tangent about that. So, the medical examiner did note that Rebecca's right hand could slip out of the bindings easily, and she was found grasping the tightening end of the rope. So these kind of slip knots, what he's basically saying is that she could have tied her feet up, tied it around one wrist, and then slipped her other hand into it and pulled one of the ropes to tighten it. And the police did want to prove that this was possible, so they recreated this scenario. I will include the link in the show notes, or if possible, I'll put it in this video. But so they recreated the scenario and they filmed a woman wrapping rope around her hands, slipping one hand out. So she wrapped the rope around her hands in front of her body, and then she slipped one hand out, put her hands behind her back, and rebound her hands behind her back. So they did prove that it was possible, but just because something is possible doesn't mean it actually happened that way. The big question, obviously, is was Rebecca physically capable of tying herself up this way? Police say yes, but critics argue that the bindings were too intricate for a solo suicide. Another red flag that we did mention was the message painted in black. It reportedly said, "She saved him. Can he save her?" Question mark. Now, Rebecca's ex-husband claimed that that's exactly what it read, but police wouldn't confirm this at first. And I was actually unable to find a picture of this at all. There is a picture in the autopsy report and the initial investigation report, the official one. There's a picture of the door where this was, but it's like redacted, like how they redact things in a paper. It's like that was redacted. They completely covered up. So I was unable to anywhere find an image of this. And I was confused at first when they said, I found multiple places where it says that her ex-husband claimed that that's exactly what it read. And I was like, well, was it written in a different language? Like, why? What do you mean? If like he can't everybody just read it and see that that's what it says? Um, but I don't think it was. I think it was written in English, and he saw it, I guess. I don't know. I'm confused by this still a bit. But the police wouldn't address this at all. And then when they finally did, they said it wasn't a clear suicide note. Um, but nonetheless, investigators treated it as support, like as supporting evidence for a suicide. She was a painter. She loved painting for in her spare time. And she often signed the paintings that she did. And her family swore that this handwriting did not match her handwriting. Her ex-husband also stated that this did not appear to be something that Rebecca would have ever written. So, a lot of questions surrounding that still. Now, Police did get search warrants for Rebecca's phone records from Verizon and AT&T. And what they showed is that night between 8 and 10 p.m., she was texting and talking with her sister Mary, mostly about Max's accident. Mary reported that Rebecca seemed completely like herself. She didn't seem off or weird, and that Rebecca stated she would call Mary the next day. Rebecca had also made tentative plans with Mary to visit her family in Missouri in September or October. So that was just in a few months. At 10:48, Rebecca's phone got a text from Nina Romano. That is the twin sister of Jonah's ex-wife, Dina. Dina and Nina. I mean, that's just cruel to do to kids, I feel like. But so Nina texted Rebecca and said that she wanted to stop by and talk about Max, but Rebecca never replied. At 12:50 a.m., Rebecca checked her voicemail, listened to a message, and then deleted it. Now, police claimed that this message was about Max's condition and how it was worsening, but they never confirmed who sent it. Rebecca's sister Mary said that police told her it was from Jonah, but because the message was deleted, no one actually ever heard this message except for Rebecca, and she couldn't tell us what it said. The police also handled Rebecca's phone really weirdly. So they were like kind of scared to turn it on. They thought that they might overwrite evidence contained in the phone's memory just by turning it on, which makes zero sense. But that's what they claimed. So they wouldn't turn it on. Instead, they decided to wait and try to figure out if there was some type of forensic software available that could allow them to examine the phone while also ensuring that nothing got disrupted on the phone. Again, why would anything get disrupted on the phone just by turning it on? That makes no sense. By August 15th, so this is over a month after her death, they finally concluded, okay, there's no technology that can help us make sure we don't delete anything off the phone. And they turned the phone on and conducted a manual search. And what happened when they finally turned it on? The voicemail was gone, of course. And they never asked AT&T to try and recover it from their servers. Why? Like, why? What if that voicemail said something else? There's so many things it could have said. Yes, of course it could have just been Jonah, like updating her on Max's status. It also could have been someone threatening her. It could have been, someone saying, we saw what you did to Max. I mean, like, it could have been a million things. Nope. Police were like, we're not going to bother. Then in September, they announced that they were going to use quote unquote new technology to copy the phone's data for further investigation. By October, they had completed this new technology investigation and said, we didn't find anything new. We're just going to give the phone back to her family. I mean, the whole thing is so sketchy. Like, look, if you put all these details together and take a hard look at this, it's kind of impossible to not think, okay, something's off here. So let's just kind of recap some of the main things here. The binding her hands and feet, questions about did she do that? Could she do that on her own? The message, the cryptic message, she saved him, can you save her? Written on the door. I mean, why would she write that about herself? Why is she writing that in third person? And what do they mean? She saved him. Who, Max? I guess at that point, at that day on July 13th, Max wasn't dead yet. Max died on July 16th. So, okay, fine. Can you save her? Well, no. Somebody, if somebody like, if somebody else was involved, then no, it's the middle of the night. She can't hang there and survive. There was no DNA or fingerprints from Adam found on Rebecca's body or the rope, but Adam cut her down, right? He removed the clothing from the t-shirt from her mouth to give her CPR. How the hell was there no DNA from him found anywhere? And then, of course, there were still questions about Max's fall. People wondering, was it an accident? Was it not? Maybe was she killed because she witnessed something she wasn't supposed to? Or was she involved in something that she wasn't supposed to be involved in? And I mean, these are just obviously a few of the questions. Also, the neck injuries, the fact that it could be from a hanging, but it could also be from manual strangulation. The fact that the bed didn't jerk far enough away from the wall to indicate somebody jumping off of a balcony, the extra footprint found on Rebecca's foot. I mean, these are all, look, none of it's concrete evidence of someone else being involved, but it creates a lot of doubt. So now we're going to fast forward all the way to 2018. Rebecca's family never was able to accept the ruling of suicide. And in 2018, they filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit. They initially cast a really wide net, which I'm not sure, I don't totally understand this. So I know we have some people who work in the legal field. Maybe you could explain this. They filed a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit and they cast a wide net of defendants, 50 unnamed John Does. And as the case moved forward, they narrowed their focus, and eventually narrowed their focus to just one person. And that was Adam, Jonah's brother, staying in the guest house. They insisted that Rebecca would have never taken her own life, and the only other person there that night was Adam, so he murdered her. Now, because this is a wrongful death lawsuit, it's considered a civil case. And unlike a criminal case, in a criminal case, guilt has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, it only requires a preponderance of evidence, which means the jury just has to believe that it was more likely than not that Adam was responsible. So it's not saying that Adam was responsible. There's no doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, yes, Adam did it. It's just that, yeah, I think he probably did it more than I think he didn't, which seems weird. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't know what I think about this case. I don't think that it is cut and dry and open shut and as a suicide. I don't know if I think that Adam did it. So again, the jury has to believe that it was more likely than not that Adam was responsible. And that's exactly what they found. On April 4th, 2018, after a month-long trial, the jury ruled that Adam was responsible for Rebecca's death and ordered him to pay the Zahau family $5.2 million in damages. Adam, of course, is denying involvement. And far more significant for Rebecca's mother and sisters was the fact that the verdict exonerated Rebecca and contradicted investigators, and kind of proved what they were saying all along. And Rebecca's sister Mary said, "For 7 years, we had to fight to make it known she didn't commit suicide, even though we knew she didn't. It has been a struggle." Now, if you thought that was it wasn't. 2 weeks after the civil verdict, the San Diego County Sheriff's Office announced they were taking another look at the case. They brought in new investigators who were not involved in the original 2011 investigation, and they had the medical examiner's office reevaluate the evidence. In November of 2018, after reviewing everything, the chief medical examiner doubled down on the original findings, stating that the investigation had been correctly concluded and that Rebecca's death was still ruled a suicide. The Zahau family was asked and refused to submit any of their own evidence from the civil case to aid in this review. Instead, they publicly accused the county officials of getting it wrong again. And meanwhile, Adam, of course, was not doing nothing with the civil verdict. He appealed the decision in February 2019. He argued that juror misconduct and procedural errors had tainted the trial. Now, I could not find anything about what this juror misconduct was, but that's what he was claiming. And before the final arguments in this appeal could even be presented, there was a shocking development. Rebecca's family agreed to settle. They accepted $600,000, resulting in the entire civil case being dismissed and wiping out the original $5 million judgment. So in the end, Adam was never charged with a crime. The sheriff's office never changed their ruling. And the wrongful death lawsuit, after years of fighting, ended in a quiet and somewhat small settlement. So, did Rebecca's family get justice? Or was this a case of money and wealth shutting the door on a lot of unanswered questions? I don't know. And a lot of people don't know. As of today, this case remains one of the most debated and controversial death investigations in history. And there are still so many unanswered questions. And this is one that for me, I'm stumped. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know. I'm not an investigator and I didn't know anybody involved and all of the things. Like what the fuck do I know? Of course. But after doing so many of these, I find that I usually have an opinion at the end as to if it was, look, they're all of these are tragic and terrible. And I don't know. I hate it when it's like the family got justice. Did they? No matter what happens, no matter how much money, no matter whether the murderer was put to death or in jail for life. I mean, like they still lost a family member. I don't know. It never feels fair. It never feels right. And I feel like if I had was in any of their positions, I don't know that I would feel closure or that justice was done. I think I'd just be pissed still and sad. But I don't know. But I do find that I usually have at least some type of an opinion about like that seems like the right thing that that person got life in jail, or that seems like the wrong thing. This was really unfair. And for this one, I just don't know. There are so many conflicting opinions and findings. And I don't know. I do think that the family so adamant, unless they really didn't know her, so adamantly believing that she would never commit suicide. I do think that, people who really knew her well, her mom, her sisters, uh, I think you know that about a person. This is going to be a weird thing to say, but I think if I ever did that, guys, I'm totally not. I'm happy. I'm not suicidal. I'm not depressed. I promise. This is not a cry for help. But if I ever did that, I don't think that anybody close to me would be like, "Oh, she would never do that. That's shocking. It's against her beliefs." No, I've gone through some serious depressions in my life. I have had times where I have felt a long, long time ago. I was a lot younger, but I have had times where I felt suicidal. I have had times where I questioned whether I wanted to be here. And so I don't think for me that's not something that is like so out of the box. Now, if I murdered a bunch of animals and then if I went like on an animal killing spree, yeah, that like I feel like that's something that people be like, no, she didn't. She would never do that. Like I would never do that. But suicide wouldn't be an impossibility, I guess, is what I'm saying. But I do know people and have friends from my past that I would say absolutely not. They would never do that. No matter how depressed they were, no matter how hopeless they felt, that is not an option for them. I also do believe that this is going to be a very cynical opinion, guys, that that most people, almost everyone, I'm going to say, is capable of anything. I think someone gets backed into a corner or I don't know, in a certain situation, I think that people are capable of doing things that you would never expect them to do. But the fact that for Rebecca, she was planning to go see her family soon. She talked to her sister that night. She didn't, people who saw her regularly said she wasn't depressed. She was happy. I know it's possible to hide that, to hide depression, absolutely, but it seems very questionable to me. So again, who cares what I think? But that's what I think. So there we go. I appreciate you guys listening. I tried really hard this episode to say less. I could like feel myself going to say it, and then I was like, no, don't say it. So I'm going to try really hard to make less mouth noises and to say much less frequently, and I really do want to try and keep these Tuesday episodes as focused on true crime and as professional as I can do. I'm not a terribly professional person, but I'm going to try. And for those people, I'm assuming they aren't listening anymore, but if the people who left the Apple reviews about the mouth noises and saying if you happen to be listening, I would love your feedback, whether you leave another Apple review or send me a message and tell me, was it better? Does this stupid little filter thing that I used help? And if not, just be honest. Like, I'll keep trying. I have never claimed to be perfect or even good at this. So I will keep trying to improve. That's all I can do. But I do appreciate the feedback. I appreciate you guys listening. I will tell you right now, there's a very good chance tomorrow there will not be a mini crime episode. I think there will be a bonus episode, but I'm going to focus on answering emails, voicemails, and Instagram messages that I have avoided answering for many weeks now. And just talking about a few other personal things. That's not a promise. Don't hold me to that. Maybe there will. I have a couple mini crime cases already written, so maybe I'll do one. But I'm thinking I have a busy day tomorrow with Jim, so I'm thinking that it will more likely be kind of an old school bonus episode where it's just me chit-chatting and answering questions. So if you have questions, thoughts, opinions, insights, go ahead and send me an email, deathxsouthwest@gmail.com. Leave a voicemail. That phone number is in the show notes. I don't have it memorized. Send an Instagram message, although those are my least favorite. I appreciate them so much, but that's how everybody communicates. And so it feels overwhelming to me. And I'm when I get real overwhelmed, I just ignore things, as you know. But yes, send an Instagram DM. I'm going to go through them tomorrow, and the emails and the voicemails. You can go to the website and send a message that way. However you want to send a message, I would love to hear from you. And if you do it before tomorrow, then I will very likely read it and respond to it on the podcast. That's it. There was my big just now. I feel like I didn't say that as much this time. Please let me know if I'm crazy or if that's true. And I really appreciate you guys listening. I love you all very much. I hope you're having a beautiful week. Thoughts and prayers go out to the Zahau family. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Okay. Bye, guys.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jonah Shacknai and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jonah Shacknai.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, "Good night and good luck."